I think it's time for us to begin with our session. Distinguished guests and ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attending this event co-organized by Korea University, Global Canopy, and National Wildlife. We are also grateful to the other partner organization of this event, the Ministry of Unification, the Korean Forest Service, and Climate Change Center. I'm Woo-Gyun Lee, the professor at Korea University and a board member of Climate Change Center in Korea. I'll be your moderator for this side event. We are holding this event to discuss cooperative efforts to reduce deforestation, including cases of cooperation between countries and engagement with the private sector. We have representatives from diverse sectors, including NGOs, international organizations, and academia will be part of our panel. I'm looking forward to better understand these issues, which are crucial in addressing the climate change problem. This session will start with the welcome remarks from the chairperson of the Climate Change Center in Korea, Dr. YoungSook. Podium is yours. Why don't you give big hands for Dr. YoungSook?
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am Dr. YoungSook Yoo, Chairperson of the Climate Change Center of Republic of Korea. Welcome to the side event hosted by the Korea University, the National Wildlife Federation of the United States, and the Global Canopy of the UK. This event is also partnered with the Ministry of Unification of Republic of Korea, Korea Forestry Service, and my organization, Climate Change Center. It is my pleasure to be part of COP27. I'm honored to be here with you today to discuss forests as global connectors. We understand how crucial the role of forest is in responding to climate change. At the COP26 in Glasgow last year, more than 140 countries pledged to strengthen conservation actions and end deforestation by 2030. This commitment to forest and land use is critical due to its coverage of around 90% of the total forest worldwide. This has been further strengthened in this COP27 with 25 countries calling to hold each other accountable for their promise against deforestation. Additional billions of dollars have also been committed to financing this effort. Several other partnerships were also established this year. For instance, the UK government and other world leaders launched the Forest and Climate Leaders Partnership to help deliver the commitment made at COP26. The European Union has also signed a partnership with Guyana, Mongolia, the Republic of Congo, Uganda, and Zambia under its forest partnerships. With this recent international cooperation in the forestry sector, I believe this side event is very meaningful and timely. Forest is a global connector, even connecting two countries together, I hope. I would like to give special thanks to the Korea Ministry of Unification for participating in the introduction of the Inter-Korean Green Détente based on forest cooperation. The Green Asia Organization, an affiliate organization of our center, the Climate Change Center, is promoting forest restoration in the Korean Peninsula as part of its action for climate change response. In 2014, we implemented an agroforestry project in Sariwon, Hwanghae-bukdo, DPRK, where we established nurseries and agroforestry pilot farms to combat deforestation, improve food security, and increase a source of energy for household consumption. I believe this kind of project can realize peace and prosperity in the Korean Peninsula. Forestry cooperation can be a driving force to connect the Korean Peninsula. These actions can be upscaled further when global partners work together like us and similar initiatives like the Green Détente. Cooperation at all levels is a prerequisite to triumph over the global climate challenge. I will leave you with a cliche I know you already have heard hundreds of times. United we stand, divided we fall. Let us work together for a better future. Once again, thank you very much for being here today, and may God bless you all. Thank you. 감사합니다.
Thank you, Chairperson of Climate Change Center of Korea, and for your the welcome remark. Thank you again. And from now on, we'll have the 60 presentations. We have 2 video records, and we have 4 presenters and panels. Let me introduce our panels from my side. Ms. Eddie Juno from National Wildlife Federation. Thank you. Why don't you give big hands? Mr. and Mugyal Park from the Korea Ministry of Unification. Okay. And Mr. Andre Vasconcelos from Global Canopy and Trust. Thank you very much. And then Dr. Peng Reng cannot be here. And then Ms. Nathalie, the worker from National Wildlife Federation. Thank you very much. Each presenters will give your presentation in 10 minutes because of the constraint our session time. And then I would like to invite the Professor Yowhan for first presentations. He cannot be here because of his huge busy schedule. Then he had a video record. I'd like to invite the Professor Son with his presentation with the video. Please begin it. Thank you very much. With the sound. Excuse me, technical staff, can you check the sound? We cannot hear any sound from video record.
Hello, I am Yowhan of Korea University.
Can
It
you
is
make
my
the
great
speaker
honor
louder?
to speak today. Unfortunately, I cannot join the meeting, and I'm very sorry about that. This is the outline of my presentation. CO2 emissions from fossil fuel combustion are increasing rapidly, and also we are seeing an increase in global temperature. About 30% of the anthropogenic CO2 is absorbed through vegetation, mainly through forests. This figure shows global carbon storage and transfer. As you see here, vegetation and soil are very important carbon storages. Forest is a key carbon sink, contributing to climate change mitigation through management, such as maintaining and increasing forest area, improvement of sink capacity through forest management, and use of forest biomass to replace fossil fuels. Now I will talk about forest and net zero. What is net zero? It is the concept of setting net emissions to zero so that the concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere no longer increases. Reducing greenhouse gases emitted by human activities as much as possible and removing greenhouse gases with forest absorption or CCUS to reduce actual emissions to a level of zero is called net zero. Net zero can be achieved in 2050 by simultaneously performing land and environmental ecological-based carbon sink and energy reduction. As I said before, forest management for carbon sink, carbon storage, and carbon substitution is necessary to achieve net zero. What are the solutions? I think the connection between nature-based solutions, resilience, and sustainability can be one of them. Net zero is one way for sustainability, in fact. Using forest as a carbon sink through afforestation and reforestation is one of nature-based solutions. What is nature-based solutions? NBS is actions to protect, sustainably manage, and restore natural or modified ecosystems that address societal challenges effectively and adaptively, simultaneously providing human well-being and biodiversity benefits. IUCN launched the IUCN Global Standard for Nature-Based Solutions, a tool that helps plan, analyze, and evaluate NBS projects. This is the summary of the guidelines by IUCN for nature-based solutions. Let me introduce a case study of afforestation in Inner Mongolia. After afforestation activities in a desert area, we found a significant increase in environmental resilience, including improving vegetation cover, increasing soil surface stability, and biodiversity change. In addition, we saw significant changes in socio-economic resilience after afforestation, such as mitigation of sandstorms, increase in job opportunities for local people, and cultivation of afforestation techniques. Although afforestation and reforestation is considered a cost-effective and readily available climate change mitigation option as nature-based solution, there are several considerations such as biodiversity issue, trade-off, and resilience to climate change. It is necessary to know whether the newly planted tree species are resistant to the climate and environment and can grow well. I would like to emphasize the importance of the relationship between approach to nature-based solutions through afforestation and reforestation and contribution to resilience and sustainability again. Our final goal is to secure sustainability, such as Sustainable Development Goals by UN. I have conclusions. First, climate change can be mitigated by increasing forest carbon sequestration through proper management. Second, nature-based solution can be highly beneficial for enhancing biodiversity, carbon storage, and community development. Third, successful afforestation and reforestation contribute to resilience and finally, sustainability. This study was supported by the Korea Forest Service as a graduate school specialized in carbon sink. Thank you very much for your attention. 대단히 고맙습니다.
Thank you very much, Professor Son. You are very on-time presentation with any loose times. Thank you very much. He mentioned about the role of forests for net zero and NBS, nature-based solution for forest management for net zero, and suggest a kind of pathways to connect NBS to sustainability. Thank you again. We will move to next presentation from Ms. Eddie Juno with the title of Importance of Nature and Forests in NDC. Ms. Eddie Juno is from National Wildlife Federation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. So I'm going to kind of continue to build off the first presenter's overview and zoom out a little bit to provide background on how and why forests and other elements of nature can fit into countries, NDCs, all over the world. So as we know, we cannot reach the 1.5 degree target without the contributions of nature. Natural climate solutions offer some of the most cost-effective and readily deployable options that we have at our fingertips. And in fact, they offer as much as 30% of that cost-effective potential overall. From 2020 to 2050, that's about 8 to 14 gigatons per year, available under $100 per ton. And about 30 to 50% of that is actually below $20 per ton. So really quite a bit of potential. And according to the latest IPCC report on mitigation, only 2 strategies, including technological and natural strategies, have more potential for cost-effective mitigation than avoided conversion of ecosystems. So a really huge opportunity and one that deserves consideration in countries' NDCs. As you can see here, the potential for very cost-effective, so again, below $20 per ton mitigation from reduced conversion of forests and other ecosystems is quite large, especially even in comparison to improved management of forests and restoration, reforestation, and afforestation. Part of this is because there are often fewer trade-offs in this strategy, less need for input and expertise. We're just simply protecting ecosystems that exist, and sometimes that can be pretty much a free action or a zero-cost action. And as the first speaker noted, it's worth noting that not all nature-based solutions or natural climate solutions are created equal. By definition, they should benefit both people and biodiversity. And those that don't actually fit into that framework. In recent years, we've seen a lot of enthusiasm around tree plantings and afforestation, but in the wrong context, these can actually be quite dangerous, including when there may be conversion of grasslands or other ecosystems. And overall, the greatest opportunity is in protecting carbon-rich and biodiverse ecosystems that already exist. These systems contain what we call irrecoverable carbon. And so, in general, we like to speak about kind of a hierarchy of priorities here, beginning with protection of carbon-dense ecosystems, then moving toward improved management of ecosystems, and finally turning to restoration last. So again, in these very carbon-dense ecosystems, if we take actions to lose this carbon, to emit this carbon, there will be no way to recover it by mid-century. So this is a very important and urgent need to prevent continued deforestation and degradation and land use conversion, because again, there won't be an option to restore it or to recapture that carbon. There are lots of these hotspots of irrecoverable carbon around the world. Unsurprisingly, the Amazon rainforest and peatlands are one major hotspot. We also see a hotspot in Southeast Asia, in the rainforests there, in the boreal forests and peatlands of Canada and Siberia in Russia. These are also quite carbon dense. The Congo Basin is another unsurprising hotspot, as are the temperate rainforests of Northwest North America, and the mangroves of the world and tidal wetlands of the world. Each of these systems, in addition to providing mitigation benefits, also provides substantial co-benefits, adaptation benefits, community benefits, and so it's easy to see that protecting and maintaining these systems has a lot to offer. As I said, improved management and restoration actions should follow, but it's also worth emphasizing that there's not enough land globally to achieve reforestation and restoration at the scales that countries are committing. So last week here we saw the release of the Land Gap Report, which suggests that pledges globally actually equal an area the size of the world's current cropland extent. So that's about half as large as the United States of America, and quite a substantial chunk of land, and it's easy to see why finding another area that size would be challenging. More than half of this area committed in theory is for reforestation. This also issues, it could put pressure on traditional land use rights, livelihoods, could again conflict with biodiversity and local biomes. The remainder is degraded ecosystems. And it's not to say that these things aren't important. Of course, we do need restoration, and we do need to expand or repair ecosystems where they no longer are. But it's often a lot slower and more technical demanding than simply protecting them in the first place. Not to say that any of these strategies will always be easy. There are caveats and barriers here, of course. It's key to note that land-based sequestration may be reversible, and it can be vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, drought, as well as new pests and diseases, and many other elements. We already mentioned this previously, but it bears repeating that some solutions that increase carbon sequestration and storage may actually harm biodiversity or local communities and their livelihoods, and those are also very important to consider. And in general, there are quite a few barriers that are preventing countries from perhaps implementing or including nature and forests in their NDCs to the extent that they might like to. This includes pressure on land use. We know commodity-driven deforestation is a major issue, enforcement and issues around supporting legal and other regulations. A lack of secure financial flows is another major barrier. We need long-term and sustainable financial flows to manage ecosystems in the long term, and this is a role that the private sector can certainly play in a lot of ways, which I'm sure many of our speakers will touch on after this. Another issue is lack of awareness or expertise and perceived risk around these strategies in comparison to others. And finally, issues around land tenure and access, which can, again, include impingement upon traditional rights or just a lack of clarity of who owns what. The good news is that countries are continuing to include nature in their NDCs. At least 70% mention actions in the forest sector to some extent. And of enhanced NDCs, which are increasing their ambition, more than 90% include nature to some extent. But there are still many opportunities for future action. Only about a fifth of countries include the land use change, and forestry sector in their NDCs at all. Less than a third refer to reducing deforestation, and only about 43% include quantitative targets. And that's really important because we need to be able to measure and monitor and learn from and adapt our strategies based on successes or failures. So really having those figures is key. So to conclude, a few of our recommendations. Again, as a general rule of thumb, and noting that there are many contexts and considerations that might differ, we recommend prioritizing conservation and protection first, then improved management, and lastly, restoration or reforestation and afforestation. Secondly, it's important to design and implement all of our NBS strategies, natural climate solution strategies, and NDCs with explicit consideration of biodiversity, social benefits, and respect for the legal and traditional rights of Indigenous peoples and local communities. If these things aren't baked into the process in the beginning, it's very likely that there could be perverse or unintended outcomes in the end. Next, as I mentioned, it's important to assess and track progress with quantitative targets. And finally, the last two really will relate to a lot of what we're talking about today. We need to coordinate across sectors to identify durable funding mechanisms and ways to keep these financial flows, ways to find them money soon, and ways to keep the flows secured to make sure these projects are able to succeed over decades, which often forest projects are multi-decadal endeavors. And lastly, consider a diversity of funding mechanisms. And so this includes a lot of different options offered within the context of the Paris Agreement. This might include Article 6 and the developments there, and other voluntary and market mechanisms at our fingertips. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Eddie, for your good presentation. Eddie explain about the barriers for NDC as land use pressure, lack of financial flow, corruption, something like that, and suggestions as the prioritizing conservation and protection and implementation with explicit consideration and considering diversity of financing mechanisms, something like that. Thank you again. We will move to next presentation from Mugyal Park, Director of Development Corporation, Ministry of Unification, Korea, for Green Détente, Inter-Korean Forestry Cooperation Program. Yeah, you can begin with.
Good afternoon. I'm Bang Mugyal, Director of Development Cooperation at the Ministry of Unification, which pursues unification of South and North Korea. The Ministry of Unification has been in charge of dialogue, exchange, and humanitarian cooperation with North Korea, not the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. On behalf of Ministry, I would like to thank Korea University, Global Canopy, and National Wildlife Federation for giving me the opportunity to present about inter-Korean cooperation and Green Détente. I'm also grateful for all the participants who are interested in global forestry cooperation. Today, I will be presenting on South Korean government Inter-Korean Green Détente policy initiative, focusing on forestry cooperation. Ministry of Unification will promote Inter-Korean Green Détente so that South and North Korea can jointly respond to climate crisis and environmental challenges. Inter-Korean Green Détente aims to promote joint response to climate-related natural disaster such as heat wave, flood, and drought. Building trust in the process will uphold peace and contribute to reducing tension on the Korean Peninsula. If North Korea returns to the dialogue table, we will start by taking small approach measures in forestry, water, sanitation, and hygiene, and then gradually expand the scope of cooperation to eco-friendly transition at village level, disaster response, and water resource sharing between South and North Korea. Ultimately, the ministry will continue its effort to develop infrastructure for climate and environmental cooperation in a calm and constructive manner. Since the early 1990s, South and North Korea have continued discussion in principle on climate and environment sector, fully aware of its significance. Geographically, the two Koreas are adjacent and we share the same ecosystem. Therefore, joint response is a necessary option. Livestock disease, such as the ASF, continue to cross the border down to the south. Pollutants emitted from outdated facilities and factories directly impact the air quality of South Korea. To elaborate, the two rivers, Imjin River and Bukhan River, flow from North Korea to South Korea. And North Korea built dams on the upstreams. As a result, during the dry season, stream flow decreases and eventually destroys downstream ecosystem in South Korea. During the flood season, North Korea released dam water without prior notice, and there are concerns over possible flood damages in downstream area. These problems are happening in the status quo. South Korean government is thoroughly managing the situation internally, but there are certain limitations. Unfortunately, North Korea's forestry is gradually degrading. Reportedly, 28% of the total forest is degraded. Such degradation makes North Korea more vulnerable to natural disaster, intensifying food crisis among the North Korean population. As a result, life and safety of North Korean population is threatened, and sustainability of its ecosystem on the Korean Peninsula is undermined. The government plans to promote various forestry cooperation projects to prevent forest degradation, create carbon sinks, and improve human rights. After 2018 Inter-Korean Summit, the South and North agreed at the follow-up forestry cooperation meeting to promote projects for afforestation and protection and restoration of natural ecosystem. In addition, the parties also promoted forest disease and pest control project. If North Korea returns to the dialogue table, South Korean government will proactively implement modernization of tree nursery to support North Korea's reforestation. Outdated tree nursery will be improved to build reforestation capacity of North Korea. As you are well aware, the current inter-Korean relations is not so favorable. Nevertheless, climate crisis is an imminent challenge. With limited capacity to combat climate change, the most vulnerable population in North Korea will bear the heavier burden. As a party to the UNFCCC, North Korea is actively participating in the global response to climate change. North Korea expressed its willingness to cooperate with international community by submitting its voluntary national review report in July 2021. On top of inter-Korean effort to restart the dialogue, if stakeholders from international organizations and NGOs have any ongoing progress or future plans, the Ministry of Unification is more than willing to support such initiatives. I'll do my best to apply your insight to refine inter-Korean cooperation. I look forward to your continued interest, and I hope that there will be more opportunities to discuss inter-Korean environmental cooperation at global platform. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mugyal Park. He introduced the Green Détente of Korea government for non-political cooperation between North and South Korea. Thank you again. We'll move to next presentation from Mr. Andre Vasconcelos with the title, The Opportunities for EU-China Collaboration on Global Deforestation.
Thank you very much. Perhaps just mentioning briefly what is Global Canopy and Trace. So Global Canopy is a non-for-profit organization based in Oxford in the UK, and Trace is an initiative that brings transparency to supply chains of agriculture commodities linked to deforestation. So it's a partnership between Global Canopy and the Stockholm Environment Institute in Sweden. I think some of the previous speakers nicely set the stage to mention that protecting forests is definitely one of the most cost-efficient ways of reducing carbon emissions at the same time protecting biodiversity. And we know that about 90 and 99% of the deforestation in tropical areas is somehow linked to agriculture, either directly converted native ecosystem systems to agriculture or through a land speculation process. And a lot of this, or most of these commodities are produced in tropical areas and then are shipped to global markets all around the globe. So it's definitely we need a global effort across the supply chain with partnerships from consumer countries and producing countries to address this problem. And we saw in Glasgow and COP26 that there is a sort of a willingness from consumer countries to really start eliminating and reducing deforestation from supply chains. And the EU, I'm going to present here a case or a case study of how the EU and China can actually cooperate. What are the low-hanging fruits for opportunities for both of them acting together to really reducing or eliminating deforestation from the supply chains. And why the EU and China? Well, basically because they are the largest consumer markets of forest risk commodities. So China is by far the largest soy importer in the globe and also beef importer, and the EU is the world's largest cocoa importer. So they really play a role in helping to really decouple deforestation from the supply chains. And the EU and China actually have been cooperating or have a long and resilient bilateral cooperation on environmental issues, which relies on a sort of a network of dialogues, including really high level from the vice premier and also to ministry levels in many dimensions of environmental issues, But since 2021, they started having annual dialogues to really try to address deforestation associated with supply chains. And now with the upcoming EU regulation on deforestation-free products, there is a really good opportunity for that, and there is a lot of expectations rising for a cooperation among the two consumer markets. But the question is, what are the opportunities for the EU and China to collaborate? So just to bring a sort of a context, why, again, the EU and China and how much they are exposed to deforestation. So by far, EU and China, so here we are looking at all global, all deforestation in tropical countries associated with global consumer markets. And in the case of China, we see that 99% of the deforestation associated or embodied in the trade in China is actually linked to a handful of commodities: soybeans, palm oil, wood products, and so on. And if we look at only soy imports from Brazil and palm oil imports from Indonesia, we see that we are talking about over 50% of the deforestation that China is exposed to is concentrated in these two commodities. And this is the same case for the EU, but Indonesia, so palm oil from Indonesia and soybeans from Brazil accounts for over 50% of the deforestation that the EU is exposed via the agriculture commodities imports. So this is, I'm talking about a sort of a national level data, but we need more granular data, and this data actually, by the way, comes from my study from Pendrew, and it's from 2017 data. But we need more granular data to understand where China and the EU are more exposed to, from first question is from where in Brazil or Indonesia these commodities are coming from, and where are the places where these commodities are linked to deforestation. And that's why TRACE was developed. And we have a high resolution supply chain data that really reveals the sourcing areas of these countries. And when we look at this very granular data, we see that both the EU and China exposure to deforestation, in the case of soy from Brazil, is highly concentrated, or 60% is concentrated in only 25 municipalities. We are talking about only 2% of all the sourcing areas between 2014 and 2018. So really, both the EU and China, they have their deforestation exposure when it comes to soy imports are really concentrated in a few places. But we never looked at to what extent these municipalities overlap. And we started looking at that with a recent analysis, and we saw that there's high-risk sourcing areas, or these 25 municipalities, where concentrates the risk of both the EU and China. 17 municipalities are the same. So we are talking about that, there is a really good opportunity for the EU and China to have a targeted action looking at specific municipalities. And if we go one step further, we start looking at who are the companies trading directly from these 25 municipalities to China and to the EU. And we see that in the case of the EU, only 3 companies account for 75% of all the exports from these 17 municipalities. We are talking about here just really only 3 companies. And when we look at China, we see that 72% of the exports is concentrated or handled by only 5 companies. And we see that these companies are actually the same. So again, there is a really, although the problem seems very complex, when we start looking at data, science-based evidence, we see that there is a very good opportunity for both the EU and China to sort of cooperate with targeted actions. And just to mention briefly, the pattern also holds for palm oil imports. So both EU and China exposure to deforestation via their supply chains or via their imports from palm oil in Indonesia, we see that 80% of their deforestation exposure is concentrated in 25 regions in Indonesia. And this data is from 2020. And 15 out of these 25 municipalities, they overlap. So with the upcoming EU regulation, the EU will demand that all the companies, all the import companies, have full traceability of their supply chains. So 100% of the supply chain has to be traceable. And this provides a really, this data, this information that I'm bringing here, really, can provide a sort of a low-hanging fruit where the EU and China could cooperate, in these particular areas, engaging with these particular companies. And the EU is also requiring to create a sort of a benchmark system to look at what are the countries at most risk, medium risk, and low risk, where they will have different due diligence requirements. And again, if we look at Brazil, it's a huge country. So looking at breaking down into municipalities or into the really, hotspots of deforestation associated with the supply chains can really help, China and the EU to start to take the first step, at least, together to cooperate. So I just wanted to bring here a sort of a case study, some critical analysis that can actually inform that this potential collaboration between the EU and China. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Andre Vasconcelos. He introduced the collaboration opportunities between Europe and China, especially in soybean and palm oil plantation in Brazil and Indonesia. Thank you very much again. We'll move to next presentation from the Peng Wang. He cannot be here because of his another schedule, so we'll have his presentation with video record. His title is a pilot project between Mato Grosso State in Brazil and China. His video recorder in a computer, but not in screen, so we'll fix it soon. Okay.
Thanks for inviting me for the panel.
We
My
cannot hear.
work over the past 50 years has mainly focused on the sustainability of investment and trade in terms of environmental social impacts. Currently, my focus is to promote the Green Belt and Road Initiative. In the following several minutes, I will address you briefly 3 points with 3 slides, mainly talking about who we are, what we do, and what we want to do in terms of the sustainability of agriculture supply chain. And please let me share my screen. Global Environment Institute, GEI, is a China-based environment organization established in 2004. And we're working in 4 areas, including climate and energy, biodiversity and community, and marine conservation programs, and the investment trade environment program, which I'm leading now. And at the GEI, we also have a Global Environmental Innovation Fund to support innovative program concepts and partnership buildings. As one of the first Chinese NGO to go abroad, we have started since 2007 to pay attention to the environmental social performance of Chinese private companies in their timber trade with Africa and Southeast Asia countries. GEI has successfully worked with the Chinese government agencies to introduce a series of guidelines to regulate the overseas investment and trading activities of the Chinese companies, including the landmark 2013 environmental guidelines for the environmental protection of overseas investment and cooperation. Now we are taking this approach to promote a sustainable China-Brazil agriculture trade. So China is the crucial demand-side market for agriculture products globally, and the international supply of agriculture products with quality and quantity guaranteed plays an essential role in China's food security and meanwhile, in the context of global climate change and biodiversity conservation, China's domestic demand and awareness of green agriculture products value chain is gradually increasing. Such market signals can help market participants in the supply chain, especially producing countries, understand their potential unsustainable factors and facilitate the transition to a more sustainable agriculture products value chain through various initiatives. From the supply chain perspectives, we believe that the exchange between China and various stakeholder countries need to be improved. The two sides can conduct dialogues, research, and cooperation on agriculture issues, focus on the unsustainable factors, and jointly explore and find solutions to ensure the safety and stability of the supply chain. So over the past course of the last several years, we have conducted meetings and interviews with more than 30 organizations in Brazil and Argentina, and carried out joint scoping studies with trees and Earth Innovation Institute, challenges, policies, and practices in Brazil agricultural sectors. And in the same time, we also collaborated with key stakeholders in China, including the CFNA, the China Chamber of Commerce of Import and Export of Foodstuffs, native produce and animal byproducts, CFNA, the National Center for Climate Change Strategy and International Cooperation, NCSC, the China Environmental United Certification Center, CEC, and also the Chinese Academy of Social Science, CAS, carrying out a series of research from different perspectives, including the China-Brazil trade relationships and the natural-based solution in agricultural sectors, and also the standards, awareness, and the market analysis of carbon-neutral beef products in China. So based upon this scope work, we have also been working with the Mato Grosso state government to acquire information for our Chinese partners about Brazil agriculture regulations and the bilateral trade relationships. GEI found that the state government has been interested in learning about the attitudes of the Chinese government, business, and consumers towards the environmental and social stability of trade. Therefore, GEI and the three parties from Mato Grosso state government signed a MOU on March 8 this year. The signing was witnessed by the Brazilian embassy in Beijing and the Chinese and the CFNA. So with this MOU signed, we hope to promote the sustainability of the China-Brazil meat value chain, which can help address the climate change and the biodiversity concerns, ensure food security, and achieve carbon neutrality. We'll also promote the establishment of China's agriculture sustainable China Stable Agriculture Committee under the CFNA. This platform involves private sectors and government and other stakeholders by conducting research, facilitating exchange and cooperation between Chinese stakeholders and producer countries in terms of standards and certification relating to the zero differentiation for the agriculture products, such as beef and soybean, and promote mutual recognition of standards for zero differentiation or carbon neutrality. And we plan to officially announce this platform in the coming CBD COP15 in this December, and we look forward to the potential collaboration with all stakeholders on these platforms. And thank you for your attention. It's a pity that I couldn't join you in person, but please feel free to reach out to me at my email address should you have any inquiries and questions. I wish you have a great discussion there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Peng Rang. He is the program manager of Global Environment Institute. He introduced the support system for sustainable agriculture and agricultural supply chain between China and Brazil via policy transformation and technical innovation. Thank you again. We'll move to last presentation from Dr. Nathalie Walker from also the National Wildlife Federation. She is the Senior Director for Tropical Forest and Agriculture. Her title is the Public-Private Alignment for Deforestation Free Cattle in Brazil.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be with everybody today. So I'm going to be talking about efforts in Brazil. Can you hear me, everyone? Thank you. I'm going to be speaking about efforts in Brazil, but then also internationally to support sustainable... Oh. It's okay. It's okay. Thank you. To support sustainable livestock, which can help a number of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. The first, clearly, in this body that we're speaking at today, is to combat climate change, also to support responsible production, and the third one is to work through partnerships. So I'm going to start with some in Brazil and then move out internationally. So Brazil's NDC currently aims to reduce emissions 50% by 2030 and to achieve climate neutrality by 2050. And it also aims to eliminate illegal deforestation by 2028. Yet while over half of Brazil's emissions are attributed to the livestock sector, there isn't currently specific guidance or support for helping the cattle sector to achieve Brazil's goals. One initiative that is doing that is Brazil's low-carbon beef and carbon-neutral beef programs that were developed by Brazil's agricultural research agency called Embrapa. And these use a mixture, they aim to sort of offset the methane emissions through reforestation, but then also support improved pasture management through better recuperating degraded pasture, using better grasses so that you can have higher stocking densities and avoid soil erosion, and then also integrate both agriculture or silvopasture, so integrate forests and with pasture. And this program's just getting started, but it's occurring aligned with Brazil's second largest meat packer, Marfrig, to help provide connections to ranchers. And it has it's both of these options, so carbon neutral beef and then low carbon beef, which has more of a focus on soil management and pasture management. Both have a large potential, but they need, in order to scale up, they need support. and it's going to take time to reach out to everybody. And so there needs to be other efforts to really help us scale up and help Brazil reach its target in time for its current goals. And it may, in fact, enhance, we hope, its NDC. So there are a number of other steps in the interim that can occur to support Brazil reach its NDC targets. Providing there's other ways to support pasture management, that the standards for low carbon beef and carbon neutral beef are rigorous. They've been tested and they're difficult to achieve because they're robust. And so in the meantime, there's a lot of efforts that can take place to support ranchers to better manage their pasture. And when they do that and they're able to improve their stocking densities through some low-tech efforts, sort of more digestible grasses that can reduce methane, rotational grazing so that the pasture doesn't get degraded, that takes pressure off land and therefore it reduces the need for land use change. There's a number of agreements between both government and voluntary agreements of meat packers towards deforestation goals, and support for those and acceleration of those, implementation of those, can also help implement reduced land use change in their supply chains and with ranchers. But there's some other efforts that governments can take that can help facilitate that, and one of those is making more data available for monitoring and traceability, which is a challenge in many products and around the world. But having data accessible is a cheap, simple, and really key step that can help to speed up assessment in the livestock sector. And there are other efforts in the UNFCCC that are being discussed as we speak that can also provide important incentives for the livestock sector, especially, for example, in Article 6, where there could be potentially large new amounts of finance to support forest conservation. And so, but this is a global challenge for us, and so there are important public, private sector, and multi-stakeholder efforts at the global level that are aligned with these goals and can help work together. So one of those is the Global Roundtable for Sustainable Beef, which is a multi-stakeholder platform. It includes 24 countries and 12 regional roundtables, and its members include a number of meat packers, retailers and brands, NGOs, and banks. And it has developed some sustainability goals. And so firstly, in regards to greenhouse gas emissions, the aim is to reduce its net footprint by 30% by 2030 by helping through climate-smart agriculture and supporting soil carbon. And there's also a nature-positive goal, which is to help to make the beef value chain a net positive contributor to nature. And members are working together throughout the world to come together with some efforts in terms of restoration and supporting forest conservation, as well as native grasslands. At the last COP, a number of the world's leading agribusiness companies came together and stated their goal to help support the Paris 1.5 degrees C target. And they agreed to come back at this COP with a work plan. And this was released at the Forest and Climate Leadership Conference last Monday here, where there was a beef section of that roadmap, where the two biggest meat packers in the world, JBS and Marfrig, set targets, both in terms of land use change to reduce deforestation and habitat conversion, but also important efforts to support producers. So they set goals of working to help producers to conduct outreach and support the implementation of some of the better pasture management methods that I've mentioned. And they're also going to work through national and international platforms so that they can encourage the rest of the industry to follow suit and come with them. So overall, there's a number of public and private sector initiatives. They all have slightly different targets, but they're all aiming in the same direction. And a lot of the methods and the techniques that they're using and the initiatives are similar and mutually supportive. And so really to get to the goal that we're all hoping to achieve, to help support the livestock sector, to be on a path towards supporting the 1.5 goal, to improve production, improve livelihoods, and also we know that cattle products are really important sources of nutrition for people around the world. It's going to take all of this, and hopefully what can happen in the UNFCCC is provide some increased funding and finance, as well as some overarching framework under which they can all work together. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nathalie Walker, for your good presentation. She explained the public-private efforts for reducing cattle-driven deforestation in terms of carbon-neutral beef and low-carbon beef, and he introduced those activities of a global roundtable on sustainable beef, GRSB. Thank you again. So far, we have 6 presentations from video record, 2 video record, and 4 panelists here. So we have almost 15 minutes for Q&A discussion time. We will have now the Q&A discussion time from floor and from among panelists. Do you have any question or comments for our the presentations? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much for a nice presentation, and it was a really good panel. I am Kamal Kumar Murari from Tata Institute of Social Science, situated in Mumbai, India. And my question is basically, I think I'll be taking forward from the Noon's paper, which talks about the deforestation hotspots. And it looks like most of the deforestation hotspots are there in developing countries actually. And the issue of climate and climate change is actually an issue from the developed countries side actually. So for your problem, why should the developing countries sacrifice for their development to look after the deforestation and compromise with your development? This is the first question actually. The second question is, I think along the same line in terms of, I think probably we're looking at what is happening in the negotiation round, and I'm not very sure. And this is a question related to the finance actually. Even if we need finance, we want the areas to do the deforestation, is there any provision in the finance as per the Article 6 of UNFCCC for providing carbon credit and carbon-based finance to developing countries so that at least they can do and deal with their livelihood actually? This is, I think, one of the serious issues that one should look at, because anyway, in the ultimate sense, the beef consuming countries are the developed countries mostly actually. So why should a developing country compromise for the sake of the benefit of the historical benefit as well as the future benefit of the developed country?
Okay, thank you very much. 2 questions. I think that Eddie, can you give your answer for first and second session, and for also financial problem, second question, you can do also.
Sure. So just to clarify, I think I heard your first question is why should developing countries have to, bear this, or how and why should protection of these carbon-dense ecosystems in developing countries be assisted or not the sole burden of developing nations? And on your second question, I think I heard you say, maybe you could repeat that second part, but you were saying are there any provisions in Article 6 that will help to protect and ensure that livelihoods are protected as part of those? Okay, thank you. I think the first question is great and very relevant. I think this is part of what we're talking about with these cooperative mechanisms that can support the financing that we need. But I might turn it over to my colleague Nathalie to kind of speak a little bit more to the whole extent of this and how we can,
Okay, yeah, Dr. Walker, yeah.
So I think it depends on You can't hear me. Is this better? Okay, great. I think it's really it's up to the parties involved in determining how they'll do that. So there isn't a specific guidance. I mean, things are ongoing right now, right? But I don't know that it will get to the specific level of that type of guidance because it's more about the sort of outcomes. But there's no reason why it couldn't be encouraged, and certainly within governments, you know, within the sort of national, when it gets down to the details of what's actually going to be implemented, then you know, at the national level then it can be discussed and supported, and I think that's the goal for that. So that's what I would assume. But
Okay, Andrea,
we
you
have to see
can-
how things go.
okay.
Yeah, maybe just to add, I'm not sure I would call it compromise. I mean, just to give an example from Brazil, I'm from Brazil, from a developing country. The CO2 emissions in Brazil, so land use change and deforestation accounts for over 45%, so almost half of the deforestation, of the emissions. And a lot of the deforestation, or most of this deforestation is driven by agriculture. What we see today in Brazil is that we already have enough degraded land where the agriculture can expand to. So we don't see, you know, when we look at the data, the information, we don't see a reason, you know, why we need to expand agriculture into native ecosystems. I think if that happens, actually is benefiting only part of the population, you know, is benefiting only part of the business mostly in the country, in Brazil. So I think we can definitely develop the country, continue growing, you know, and increasing productivity in the country, in the case of Brazil I'm talking about, while protecting nature, protecting biodiversity, ecosystem services, and so on. And definitely by protecting nature, we are also, you know, protecting the agriculture itself, because agriculture depends on the ecosystem services, on the rainfall patterns, and so on. So that's just my 2 cents to your question.
Okay, thank you very much. You had the answers. It's okay for you? Okay, thank you very much. We have another question from, okay.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Edson Krenak. I'm from Brazil as well, and I'm an indigenous person. And thank you for your presentations. I really learned a lot of things, but other topics kept me a little bit confusing about 2 topics. First is indigenous peoples having participated in the COP for years and increasing our attempt to participate, because we are present, but we are not yet participating, because all solutions that I have seen and I heard tonight, this evening here with you, is I feel the lack of participation, or to reflection on the role of indigenous peoples, because the solutions and even in the best scenarios, they are not discussing all the grievance mechanisms and the violation of human rights and indigenous rights that is going on along those progressive or development projects. I could give you several examples, but not I don't want to extend my question. I want to focus, I would like to hear more about the role of indigenous peoples in those solutions, in those participation. And the second question, going to be a little bit more elementary, because we are still, as indigenous people, trying to understand why the language of carbon market or credits changed from compensation to market. And we are very concerned about that, because in the beginning we talked a lot of carbon compensation, and then we could kind of envision our role or our participation as the best defenders of the forest, as the best sources of carbon credits. But now it seems that not only the change of the language, but the policies of that this mercantilization or marketization of the carbon just represents a new violations of the indigenous people's roles and rights to self-determination and the importance as the best protectors of the forest. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Your questions also with the comments. Who can, yeah, okay, Dr. Walker.
Thank you very much for your question. I think as to your first part about the indigenous rights and where we didn't talk, I can at least say for cattle, the initiatives for cattle in Brazil and elsewhere, that they are, all of them require traceability and monitoring of land and legalization. And so this should avoid encroachment on indigenous lands and safeguard indigenous lands. And that's very key to all of these initiatives. So yes, that wasn't mentioned because I talked about sort of the big picture of the sort of the climate and forest goals, but that's key to it. And we know that a lot of the encroachment is caused by the cattle sector. And so having these efforts and supporting producers to use the current land they have better and to monitor where they're producing can help safeguard and avoid encroachments on indigenous lands. But it's really important. So, but I'll let somebody else take the question about markets.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah.
Well, I'm not sure I can speak fully to that either, but I guess I would just like to emphasize and really echo what you said. I think, to be very clear, there are no better stewards of lands than indigenous peoples. That is reflected in the data all over. Rates of deforestation and degradation are lower in indigenous stewarded areas. Biodiversity is higher, and that is, true in many regions of the world. So I think really what we need to be talking about is not consultation or anything like that, but really indigenous leadership in these initiatives, co-creation at the very minimum, and co-implementation, going beyond these kinds of box checking efforts to just include or consult in minor ways. And unfortunately, I guess the question about carbon markets and that terminology is perhaps beyond my pay grade and expertise, but I think we, NWF and others, can't emphasize more that indigenous people's rights and leadership should be central to all of these efforts.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, thank you. Another questions or comments from the floor? Okay, okay, thank you.
Yeah, Grayson, I have a very simple question to you. So during your presentation, you mentioned about capitalize. The EU and China can capitalize those things. So if you don't mind, please say more about capitalize.
Maybe it was the wrong choice of words, but what I meant is to really, seeing that there is a sort of the risk or the deforestation that they are exposed to, their supply chains are so concentrated in a few places and in the hands of a few companies that they can use this opportunity to engage with a few companies, to really make a change on that particular areas. So maybe when I mentioned capitalize, is really to act on this low-hanging fruit opportunity, let's say like that. So I hope that answered your question.
Okay, thank you very much. I would like, as a moderator, I would like to ask first Mr. Mugelbach for the reforestation or forest restoration plan in terms of Green Détente initiated by Korean government, and also for addressing carbon neutrality in Korean Peninsula very briefly. And then I would like the panelists to ask how your experience can apply to North Korean forest restoration or reforestation. Okay.
예, 질문해 주셔서 감사합니다. 먼저 북한과 관련해서 북한과 한국은 같은 이제 생태계를 가지고 있기 때문에 북한 산림 복구는 대단히 중요한 문제입니다. 대한민국에도.
Thank you, Marder, for addressing this question. North Korea and South Korea both share the same ecosystem, so restoration of North Korean forestry is also important for the South Korean.
예, 그래서 2018년도에 남과 북한 정상회담에서 산림 협력에 대해서 합의를 한 바가 있고 또 그런 구체적인 합의 사항을 이행했던 적이 있습니다.
Back in 2018, the South and North Korea had a symmetry, and in that summit, both parties agreed to facilitate forestry cooperation, and there are some progress that we have made.
그 회담에서 남과 북은 우리 남한이 북한 산림의 복구를 위해서 양묘장 현대화, 그다음에 산림 관련 자재 장비 지원, 기술 지원 그리고 산림 병해충 방제를 공동으로 하기로 합의했었습니다.
At that dialogue, South Korea and North Korea agreed that the South will provide the North on the issues of tree nursery modernization and the provision of equipment and technical support and pest control chemicals.
예, 한국 정부는 지금 북한이 대화에 나오지 않고 있지만 대화에 다시 나온다면은 2018년도에 합의했던 사항부터 시작해서 북한 산림 복구를 위한 그런 큰 계획을 준비하고 있습니다.
Okay.
Although North Korea is not making any move at this very moment, but if North Korea comes back to the negotiation table, we will take necessary measure to restore the forest in North Korea, and we have willingness to further substantiate this plan.
예, 이러한 정부의 노력과 함께 여기 계신 여러분들의 남북 산림 협력에 대한 관심과 지지를 부탁드리겠습니다. 감사합니다.
In addition to the South Korean government's effort to facilitate such forestry cooperation, I would like to urge all the participants and panelists here for your continued support on this imminent issue. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Mugyalbak. As Mr. Mugyalbak mentioned, North Korean forest has been very strongly degraded for food and energy supply in North Korea. But this North Korean forest degradation also bring about the water, food, energy nexus damage. And then these days, the forest restoration is very crucial issues, not only in Korean Peninsula, but also in global aspect for water, food, energy nexus and carbon neutrality in Korean Peninsula and Central Asian countries and global aspect. So I would like to ask panelists, how can you apply your experience to North Korean environmental or forest restoration? From Eddie, can you explain about it?
Certainly. I think we can be creative and look for different ways to approach these problems or support improved forest management, forest restoration. We saw there are a lot of demand side measures that can be taken in some situations. So that's one category of solution to consider. I think knowledge sharing and transfer, as we've emphasized several times throughout this conversation, these are a shared ecosystem, and so really, finding those opportunities to exchange knowledge between research institutions or practitioners could be very key. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And Andre?
Sure. Thank you for the question. I mean, I would go in the same lines as Eddie. I think it's there are so many great restoration projects across countries, in many countries across the world. So I would say that cooperation would be key, perhaps with exchange between countries, with people traveling to other countries to see what worked, what didn't work, learn from these experiences, but also applying some of the principles of the nature-based solutions. And as our colleague said from Brazil, really incorporate local benefits to restoration programs. So in the design, the implementation need to be in partnership with local communities, people who really depend on the native ecosystem systems.
Okay, thank you very much. And Dr. Walker, can you give us good advice?
I think both the other speakers gave great answers. I think maybe just to add to that, to sort of nest it in a wider sort of land management program to ensure it's supportive and look for the more holistic benefits. Again, there's great guidance in other bodies, and then also there's a lot of new focus on metrics. So really measuring and understanding impact to help you, practice adaptive management, so you can learn what tools apply or don't work well in the national context.
Thank you very much. Before asking the closing remark to Chair of Climate Change Center in Korea, I would like to ask all panelists if you have anything that you can give your final remark or final statement, if you have. Yeah.
I just want to mention quickly that I presented a lot of data without giving an analysis, without giving much of context on the methodology. So I would be very happy for those online or those here in person to really talk about and detail more about the methodology.
Thank you very much. And Eddie?
Yeah, I think I would just emphasize, again, these crises we're facing right now, climate change and the biodiversity loss, are very interconnected, and we need to approach them holistically. And I think, a lot of these different strategies we spoke about today are one way to do that.
Okay, Dr. Walker, and then, yeah. Okay.
네, 오늘 와주셔서 감사드리고요. 남북 기후환경 협력 그린 데탕트에 대해서 많은 관심과 또 조언, 어떤 경험 공유를 부탁드리겠습니다.
Thank you for coming to this session. Regarding climate change cooperation between South and North Korea, I wish support and advice on implementing our Green Détente policy, and I look forward to keeping in touch with all of you. Thank you.
Yeah, okay, thank you very much. Dr. Walker?
Likewise, it's been really wonderful to hear such diverse speakers and different perspectives. I think what they have in common is about partnerships with different actors, and so really learning about how we can learn from each other and reach out across geographical boundaries and between public, private sector actors with local communities is really, and learning from one another is something I think that we can all share value in. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you all the panelists. And lastly, I would like to invite the Dr. Yu, the Chairperson of Climate Change Center of Korea, for evaluating our session and for complimenting our session. Thank you very much.